This 96-year-old lady had to go to a care facility, so she gave her cottage to a homeless guy who was constantly hanging about the neighborhood. He was relieved to finally have a place to call home, so he moved in with a positive attitude. What he discovered inside, though, was really remarkable. Stephen waited anxiously on the street in front of the home. He still couldn't believe this place was now his. Though he had visited this place several times before, each visit seemed like the first. But the mansion wasn't the only thing in store for him. Using the key the attorney had given him, he entered the building. As soon as he looked around, he had the comforting feeling of being back home. His recollections of the event were spot on. There was, however, one anomaly that immediately drew Stephen's notice. The table was occupied by huge luggage, and it had his name on it. He opened the suitcase gingerly, his mouth dropping the whole time. I can't believe she's done this. But some context is needed to make sense of Stephen's predicament and his discovery. The 96-year-old Ellie Barnes of rural Alaska had spent her whole childhood in the area and never saw a need to move. She had been there for 72 years with her husband, Peter, and she loved it nearly as much as she adored him. Ellie liked the solitude of the countryside and would often sit on the porch with Peter when the weather was nice. But shortly, everything in her tranquil existence would change radically. Peter's death was sudden and came after a brief hospitalization. There was a startled silence from Ellie. Despite their advanced years together, she had never given any thought to the possibility that Peter might pass away first. He had always had better health than her, and without him, she didn't know what to do with herself. Their kids weren't as enamored with the last frontier as Ellie and Peter were. They decided to uproot and go all the way across the country to the southern United States. If Ellie ever chose to relocate to either Boston or Dallas, she would have the option of living with either of her daughters. In contrast, Ellie loathed the idea of urban living. In addition, she had Alaskan ancestry that no one else could fathom. Ellie met Peter on her first day of elementary school after moving to Alaska. There wasn't a lot for youngsters to do back then but hang around in their yards and ride bikes, and the size of their community prevented this from becoming an issue. Ellie's goals in life always included marrying Peter and beginning a wonderful life with him, but not everything worked out as expected. After they tied the knot, Ellie and Peter had a hard time settling into permanent employment. They were only able to afford a one-bedroom rancher with a cramped living room rather than Ellie's ideal house. It wasn't a walk in the park, but they made it work by putting money aside whenever feasible for maintenance. However, the residents would not help. It seems like 1,000,000 repairs had been made to the home before Peter's death, and Ellie was aware that a sane person would have destroyed it by then, but she couldn't bring herself to do so because of the memories associated with the house. She wanted assistance making sure the home was ready for another year of snowfall, but now, who would be there to aid her? Ellie was fortunate in that a neighbor only 10 minutes away came to her aid. They'd been pals for a while, so they volunteered to help out with household chores, yet there was a lot that needed fixing, from the broken windows to the leaky roof. Furthermore, Ellie's neighbors were experiencing difficulties of their own. Their son, Stephen, who had been homeless for a long time before moving in with them, also caused them concern. Unfortunately for Stephen, Ellie's hometown wasn't exactly a warm and kind place. Stephen had been looking for work unsuccessfully. Due to the lack of resources, he would never be able to support himself financially in such a remote location. He despised being dependent on his parents, but he had nothing with which to go farther away from home in pursuit of employment. He had almost given up when things started to turn around for him. To help out around Ellie's home, when his parents were too weak, Stephen would often help out. He was bored and decided to provide a hand to Ellie in any way he could. Stephen consistently rejected Ellie's attempts to compensate him, since the two of them had met under such horrific circumstances, and he felt obligated to her. Everyone in the little village knew that Stephen had been homeless before he returned. They passed quick judgment on him and didn't offer him any respect, so he felt very alone. However, Ellie and Peter had accepted him without hesitation, and their regular dinner invitations had helped bring him out of his funk. He sought any opportunity to return her generosity. When he agreed to provide a hand, he had no clue how dramatically his life would shift as a result. Stephen continued taking care of Ellie in whatever way he could. He went food shopping for her, cleaned the home, and even completed the repairs. They established an even greater relationship. Since Stephen wouldn't take any money, she insisted on cooking him supper and sewing him a new scarf for the winter. But not everyone was delighted. He spent so much time at her place that he didn't have any left to look for employment. They'd been supporting him for years, and Stephen's lack of regular income was pushing their budget far too thin. Something would have to give. Finally, Stephen's parents informed him that he had to choose between aiding Ellie and staying at home. They couldn't continue to assist him if he wasn't going to make an attempt to sustain himself. While Stephen understood, he was also astonished that his parents weren't more generous with Ellie, given she had always been so friendly to everyone. It was time to make a choice. Stephen informed his parents that he wasn't willing to forsake Ellie. They'd spent months together, and he considered her his sole friend. Stephen's parents urged him to gather his stuff and depart. They didn't want him to be homeless again, but they didn't know what else to do. Neither did Stephen. He was at a crossroads. He understood that if he left town, he would have greater possibilities in one of the major cities, but that would mean leaving Ellie behind. He could still contact her and catch up, but he wouldn't be there anymore to assist her with errands. What would she do without him? Stephen realized that he had to go away for his own good. His parents were happy and gave him enough money to get established in a hotel for a couple of weeks while he got a job. But as Stephen packed, he wasn't particularly anxious about what the future in the city might bring. All he could think of was saying goodbye to Ellie. Stephen went to tell the news to Ellie. She was saddened by the news. They had both gotten close after spending so much time together. But Stephen felt that he didn't have any other option. With his parents in such a financial strain, he needed to establish a life for himself. He merely lamented that Ellie wouldn't be such a huge part of it anymore. Or so he thought. Ellie attempted to get by without Stephen, but she'd learned to depend on his aid. She was too elderly to accomplish many things by herself. Her children continued pressuring her to leave the home behind and go south, but she'd raised her entire family in that home. It was Peter's home, the last piece of him she had. Ellie couldn't bear to part with it, but she was starting to feel that she wouldn't have a choice. Ellie was resolved to at least give surviving alone a serious try. She went to the store, kept the home tidy, and attempted to perform some repairs herself. She stayed at this for almost 3 weeks when something occurred that made plain to her that this was just no longer an option. While Ellie was cleaning up in the kitchen, she stumbled over a towel that she dropped on the ground. Ellie fell, and she fell hard, shattering her hip in the process. While Ellie attempted to conceal this at first, her family was swiftly notified by the doctor, and this was the last straw for them. They wanted Ellie to relocate to a retirement home near to them. Ellie had always strenuously opposed this, but by this time, the reality of the situation had set in. Ellie realized that what she was trying was ridiculous and hazardous, and all she was doing was making her family worry. It was time to leave the house she had been in for 60 years of her life. But with Ellie knowing she would be going, there was just one question remaining. What was she planning to do with the house? Ellie realized she could attempt to sell the house, but it would definitely not bring her much money. Besides, there was only one person who was genuinely entitled to it, Stephen. Ellie decided to call a lawyer in to assist her, to make sure the transfer of the house would go well. She also wanted the lawyer to notify Stephen about everything, since Ellie knew that she would not be able to get a word out if she was the person phoning Stephen, and she wanted everything to be stated loud and clear to him. Ellie also wasn't really sure whether Stephen wanted her former home, but it didn't really matter to her. What she knew for sure was that he wanted everything she left behind within, for him. See, the home was simply a ploy to cover what Ellie genuinely intended to offer Stephen, but it had to be a surprise. When Stephen received the call from the lawyer, he was incredibly shocked and somewhat puzzled about what to do now. He never anticipated Ellie to leave the home she loved so much alone give it to him. What did he truly do to deserve this? Or was there more behind this? Ellie's gesture was almost too kind. Everything in Stephen told him that maybe his parents had something to do with it. Could they have wanted him to live closer to home again? The more he thought about it, the less he truly wanted to live in rural Alaska again. The possibility of having a home, no matter how awful of a state it was in, was too attractive to resist. It was such a kind offer from Ellie, even if his parents had anything to do with it. And anyway, he could always simply sell it for some cold hard cash if he wanted to. It had not been an easy time for Stephen ever since he went back to the big metropolis. He had been living on the street, and, except some odd jobs he had found, any type of opportunity, which was the major reason why he returned back to the large metropolis, was hard to come by. Despite this unpleasant circumstance, Stephen felt a lot more at home in the huge metropolis and had immediately concluded that he wanted to remain there. With the money he may perhaps obtain from selling the property in his pocket, he could maybe have a better start here. At least, that was his original goal. He contacted the lawyer back to inform him that he accepted the offer and he wanted the home. He also inquired whether he would be able to assist him sell it. But then the lawyer told him that the only requirement was that he would visit the residence at least once. Stephen was considerably taken aback and somewhat bewildered by this peculiar state. He demanded an explanation, but the lawyer couldn't go any more on it, or maybe he simply didn't want to. Semi-hesitantly, Stephen decided to take the offer anyhow. How horrible might visiting the site just once be? Stephen's next action was to phone Ellie. He, of course, wanted to thank her for giving him the home and wanted to know how she was doing and why she had moved out of the house, but he also hoped she might provide him an explanation for the unusual condition. Stephen could not get a hold of Ellie no matter how frequently he tried. The phone simply kept going to voicemail. Suddenly, Stephen became concerned. Did anything possibly happen to her? That's why he's getting the home, right? Is there a chance that it was passed down because she had died? The attorney had not told him why Ellie had left the home, just that she wished to leave it to him. He took it at face value and didn't bother to ask any questions. Is it possible that his having been there plays a role? At first, he assumed he had to come there because Ellie was trying to repair his relationship with his parents, even though he was still on the fence. Stephen planned to see the home the next day. The lawyer footed the bill for his ride to the residence. As soon as Stephen got to town, he visited Ellie at her residence. Instead of going to his parents' home, he stayed far away since he didn't want them to find out he was there. He only prayed that they wouldn't be waiting for him when he arrived at Ellie's, but there seemed to be no one there when he arrived. The two new locks on the door caught him off guard. When he used the keys he got from the attorney to enter the residence, on the surface it seemed that nothing else about this location was unusual. But then he noticed the huge bag sitting in the middle of the table set for dinner. He walked up to the luggage, wondering whether it may have been left for him, and discovered his name on the label. Given that he recognized Ellie's handwriting, Stephen deduced that she was responsible. Opening the bag, he saw immediately that it was packed with individual packets. To avoid bias, Stephen chose one envelope at random. It simply said, "To go grocery shopping." He then proceeded to choose a few more, for mending the gutter, for scrubbing the stove, and for strolling with her. All of Stephen's efforts over the years on behalf of Ellie and Peter. But now we get to the finest part. Those envelopes contained various amounts of cash. The bills might be anything from $10 to $50. When Stephen finally got around to opening them all and counting the cash, he determined that the grand amount was somewhere around $15,000. Even though he was still somewhat stunned, Stephen tried calling Ellie again. This time, to his delight, she answered the phone. Ellie said he had earned everything over the course of 2 years, but had refused to take any of it. She felt obligated to repay Stephen for his generosity and assistance, and this was her method of doing so. Even the thought of it made Stephen cry. If he got his hands on this money, it would completely alter his future. Moreover, he felt tremendous relief at learning that Ellie was still alive. Assuming he received the money, Stephen would use it to rent an apartment in Anchorage. Stephen was finally able to turn his life around. After establishing a foundation of sorts, he was able to get employment immediately and rapidly began climbing the corporate ladder. Very quickly after that, he met his current fiancée, and the two are now living together and making plans to raise a family. As time passed, he and his parents became closer, and he now visits them once every few weeks. And he always made a point of stopping by Ellie's home whenever he was in town to make any necessary repairs. He retains ownership of the property and now leases it to a local couple who want to raise their own children there. Before Ellie died, Stephen would have one more chance to visit her. About 6 months after she gave him the house and the money, he paid a visit to see her at the retirement home. He could thank her over the phone 1,000,000 times, but he needed to tell her in person just once. Send your gratitude to the one who made a difference in his life. You like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your cooperation.